Tech mogul Elon Musk made an appearance at the Oval Office yesterday.
Here's Musk defending DOGE's initiatives.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy.
Musk also discussed the painfully slow process of retiring and receiving benefits, revealing something interesting in the process.
This is actually, I think, a great anecdote because we're told the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And like, what do you mean a mine? Like, yeah, there's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. Then the limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. And the elevator breaks down sometimes, and then nobody can retire. Doesn't that sound crazy? There's like 1,000 people that work on this. So I think if we take those people and say, like, you know what, instead of working in a mine shaft and carrying manila envelopes to, boxes in a mine shaft, you could do practically anything else, and you would add to the goods and services of the United States in a more useful way.
Everybody listening was probably thinking, huh? But that limestone mine is real. Washington Post reporter David Fairholt wrote a piece about it in 2014 titled "A Sinkhole of Federal Bureaucracy in Pennsylvania." Fairholt wrote, during the past 30 years, administrations have spent more than $100 million trying to automate the old-fashioned process in the mine and make it run at the speed of computers. They couldn't. So now the mine continues to run at the speed of human fingers and feet. That failure imposes costs on federal retirees who have to wait months for their full benefit checks, and it has imposed costs on the taxpayer. The Obama administration has now made the mine run faster, but mainly by paying for more fingers and for more feet.
Here's what Morning Joe Scarborough had to say about Musk's initiatives this morning.
This is, I think, a concept that many Americans would support, a lot of independents would support. The question, though, is it being done legally? Is it being done constitutionally? And is it being done transparently? I think Elon Musk getting before reporters, I actually think as much as possible, since his people are running through these government agencies, I think that is extraordinarily important. And it's also, of course, most important that the letter of the law is followed, that the Constitution's followed, that actually Congress cares about its Article 1 powers.
The editor-at-large of The Bulwark, Bill Crystal, wrote on Blue Sky, prediction, Trump will never again let Musk take questions in the Oval Office. Editor-in-chief of Midas News, Ron Filipkowski, wrote, Trump babysitting Elon's kid, while Musk holds court with the press in the Oval Office.
Broadcaster Piers Morgan wrote on X, the media may mock this extraordinary Musk-Trump show from the Oval Office, but I suspect the way they're talking about how the U.S. federal government has been spaffing so much taxpayer money, will have many Americans cheering loudly. Yes, I agree with Piers Morgan, and I actually agreed with what Morning Joe had to say there for the most part. I thought it was a pretty successful press conference. I think the anti-Trump or never-Trump people are just like always seeing what they want to see. The mine anecdote, again, that's real. That's reporting from the Washington Post on the difficulty of retiring federal employees who want to retire because the process is not automated in any way. Maybe if you have too many federal employees down in this mine, they accidentally delve too deep and too greedily and awaken the Balrog to come up from the center. You don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm completely lost.
Well, but you viewers know what I'm talking about.
But I am pleased to see that we acknowledge that President Obama had speeded up the mine's workings during his time in office. Look, the mine thing, of course, I mean, it is kind of crazy, as Elon Musk said, and there's no disputing that. The thing that was unusual about the mine anecdote yesterday was it was one of the very few claims that was supported and verifiable, partly because of that Washington Post story. The rest of the time, we just had this kind of blizzard of claims with no substantiating evidence at all. Now, to be clear, I think it is likely, if not certain, that there is wasteful spending, fraudulent spending, and so forth in a government budget that runs to around $6 trillion. What I don't like is Elon Musk just sort of pontificating, throwing claims out. Then he says that, oh, we're involved in maximal transparency. When you go to the official DOGE website, it has a grand total of 6 words written on it, with the exception of the title of the agency. The people voted for major reform. That's supposedly maximal transparency? I mean, it's a ludicrous claim to me.
Well, there should be more transparency, and everybody should, defend their assertions. But like the way the New York Times framed this, that Musk makes broad claims of federal fraud without proof. The proof does exist. Like there's
let's see it then.
Well, okay, that'd be like me saying, or the headline, Robby Soave claims when you jump out of an airplane, you should wear a parachute without proof, because there's been no study on that. But I mean, we're bringing forward claims of
we acknowledge that
$50 billion in Medicare
exists.
fraud, Pentagon losing funds, failing every audit. Like that's not an out there claim. That's not like a vaccines called autism
but
claim.
But that's not what he said, though. I mean, he would make all these other claims about, so we're paying Social Security for people who are 150 years old. Okay, perhaps we are. Can we see the evidence that we are? There's no evidence provided. He talks about, we put it on X. What he puts on X predominantly, or what DOGE puts on X predominantly, are claims. And so people have been pressing from various journalistic organizations to say, okay, let's see what the
a lot of this stuff has already been.
Maybe he will provide it. Maybe he will. But that's different. The New York Times correctly says he's making these broad claims without providing evidence.
A lot of these, if I were to make a criticism, I would say that sometimes Elon Musk and the DOGE people sound like they're the first people ever to have discovered some massive amount of waste and fraud that often has been reported in either conservative media, like the limestone mine, or just in the mainstream media. Like for all the negative criticisms I make of the mainstream media, that's mostly a criticism of the slant that comes through in a lot of the opinion content. A lot of times there's great reporting on the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. I also, just to go back to the mine thing again, it's an example of the kind of thing that I think is the most affirmative and positive case for Elon Musk's vision of DOGE, which clashed a little bit with apparently Vivek Ramaswamy's vision in using DOGE as under the U.S. digital services to upgrade the infrastructure of government agencies to make them more modern, more efficient, to run better, more speedily, just as U.S. digital services initially came into existence to make the disastrous Obamacare website better, and that worked. They did make the website better. They could do that with the payment systems, with all these things. So it doesn't necessarily need to be ideological. We need to make it on a non-ideological basis. The processes of the government, we need to upgrade them to fit the 21st century.
Oh, I agree.
If that's what he's identifying and doing, that's great.
No, I agree with that. But is that what he's doing, and is that all of what he's doing? We were talking earlier on about the legal cases that suggest that his people have access to people's private financial information and that is unlawful by its nature. That will be determined by the courts. But the other thing is, he was asked about conflict of interest, which I've long thought is the single biggest and best argument against what he is doing.
Sure.
And he made this, in my mind, ridiculous argument that, if SpaceX, for example, has a contract, it's not me who's doing it, that's the people over at SpaceX. It's his company. He was the founder of it. He would obviously gain from gains for SpaceX.
Sure, I hear you on that, and I have consistently heard you out on this and said that I agree that there can be conflicts of interest, especially if he's deciding, who's getting contracts and grants and things. Well, a lot of it is his companies. Now, I would also point out that the sheer number of, he's a very wealthy and successful man with a lot of companies that that so many branches of the federal government have gone after for so many different reasons that, it can't be to some extent his fault that there's a conflict of interest that various regulators or political figures have him in their crosshairs, and so you say there's some kind of conflict of interest. Well,
No, but the
They can always do that.
the conflict of interest is that the President of the United States is sending Elon Musk, he says, into the Department of Defense. Both you and I would like to see cuts.
Him do massive cuts.
To the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense is one of the main origins of these extremely lucrative contracts that his companies have. So therefore there is an obvious conflict of interest on its face between the idea that this is some fair arbiter of where there is wasteful spending versus this man who is also in a position to gain from what the Department of Defense decides.
If there are examples that come out of something not being cut that should be cut because it's an Elon contract, we will definitely be criticizing it.
We'll be covering it extensively.
Next up, save those pennies for a rainy day? Not anymore. Bye-bye to the penny we will discuss.